Here we are on the other video um, from the inside on camera 2. I'm going to play some Pandora music, my working motivation music. Yeah, so I set up the second camera on the inside of the car so you don't see the backside of me for the majority of the work. Yeah, so you can see where my brace, it goes across the soft top brackets, and they're just bolted in place. Makes it easier. I don't have to tack weld anything. So I'm tacking and welding across the A and B posts and the door openings. Of course, the body and the shell are completely still bolted in place into the frame. Not a lot of flexing. Plus the car's not rusty. It's still solid. I mean, you can see the floors. The floors look really good. At least the passenger floors look really good. Still really solid. Yeah, so I was building a Jag Mark V drop head coupe couple years ago. So I had, when we pulled the body off of that, and that was huge. That was a very heavy, large car. A lot larger than a Triumph. But when we pulled the body shell off of that chassis, we ended up bracing a lot. So we had a lot of extra of angle iron and rebar and some other bracing that we use. And of course, when we finished that car, I removed all the bracing once we mounted it back. So, all right. So here's an interesting. Some people think I may be bracing up a lot of weird bracing. These aren't really bracing. I'm using these as reference points. So I'm actually going to make reference points for the seat. Sorry, not correct. Making reference points for the radio and transmission cover. So where the radio bracket mounts through the floors into the frame, I've found on many floors, which I've done a lot of floors, they don't tend to line up very well. So I'm actually threading bolts into this little bracket as reference points into the chassis through the large holes in the floors, and then just tacking all these little brackets in place. So when I actually do the floors, I can make sure those holes and those bolts line up correctly. So when I do put the car back on the chassis, it will line up correctly. From experience, I have noticed that a lot of the floors are too wide. I think on my GT6, I took 3/4 of an inch off just because they were too wide. I think the issue is that when they're stamped, when the floors come up in the middle, I think they kind of flex back flat. So they end up, where the holes in the transmission cover, I think they end up a little bit wider than they should be. Obviously, the 90-degree bend on the edges at the rockers, they don't flex. But either the dies or maybe they're just going back into shape or flattening out over the years or just after stamping. But the floors are wider if you just go straight off the sills. So when you put the transmission cover or radio mount aluminum piece into place, those holes don't ever line up. And I've seen that many times. So that's one of the reasons why I do the sills and the rockers and the door gaps first. It doesn't matter what the floors are. Floors are floors. You're not going to see it. It's functional. You want your door gaps right. So if you do the floors first and then base your sills and rockers off of that, and if they're if they're too wide, then your sills and your rockers are going to be sticking out, and you can't get that shape right. So, yeah. So here's the new inner sill for the passenger side. And what I'm doing on the inside here is pretty much exactly what I did on the driver's side. So, at least you see the inside and my front side, not my back side. So you can see that brace, the angle iron, right behind the handbrake, and the other one right below the door hinges. Those actually have nuts and bolts welded, or just nuts welded to the ends. And I have these large 3/8 bolts that are threaded out, so I can actually measure where the sill is, and if I need to push the doors out or push the sills out, I can just turn it a few flats. And I love that new DeWalt side grinder. The battery technology is awesome. Um, I don't even use air tools much anymore. I mean, electric impact, but this new flathead DeWalt cutter is amazing. It's my favorite tool now. It's not cheap for the flathead tool, but I may actually get a second one. It's not that hard to switch between cutting and grinding, um, but it's such a nice tool and convenient. I may just buy a second one just because it's awesome. It's brushless, so I hope it lasts. Um, and you see that I use that thing constantly. Yeah, so I'm actually the A post filler. You can see how I'm drilling out a lot of the spot welds because obviously I'm going to save and reuse that. And I do use the air chisel. So I've got an air chisel that's really, really convenient. Usually if you drill out some of the spot welds and you get the air chisel and you get a spot weld chisel bit, um, I actually make custom ones, but they break from time to time. I actually get two of them and I make them really long, so they're like 12, at least 12 inches long. The long ones are really awesome, but when you buy them, they're always short. I've never seen anyone sell a long one, so I ended up usually getting a punch and then cutting the tip off and welding them. But with all that chiseling and hammering, it usually breaks the weld because I'm not sure which metal alloy, tool steel, whatever this punch material is. But I usually just have to weld them back and then try to temper them back. Alright, so here's the rocker panel going on. First test fit with no other items in place. And there's another video of the outside of this. Alright, so I think that's the end of day one of this narration at least. So this is day 6. I think I have the garage doors open. So this is day 6, I believe. here I am remaking that bottom panel. That bottom patch repair below the A post. Yeah, so basically the procedure, what I've been doing is basically I've replaced all the door hinges, getting the doors exactly where they need to be, and then just bracing and measuring as much as I can, cut everything out, and just do one piece at a time, double checking and mocking up, test fitting, test fitting, test fitting. That's basically what I'm doing. So obviously the bonnet's already been worked on. You can see those in a lot of my pictures. The original bonnet was actually most every Mark 1, Mark 2 bonnet. They're all been tapped in the front. It's it's impossible to find an early bonnet that hasn't had the nose tweaked or bumped or wrecked. But I did manage to find a Mark 3 bonnet from a parts car that was in excellent shape. It had one little issue which I ended up repairing, besides the fact that it's the wrong model. But I ended up hand making the center grill section to weld in and insert the Mark 1 grills. So I ended up making those with my bead roller. And then I had to change the square turn lights as well. So I ended up buying from Canley, I believe. Yes, I got those from Canley Classics. The Mark 1 2 double light repairs or patches or conversions, whatever you want to call them. So I got the Mark 3 bonnet, cut the whole front light section corners out underneath the headlights. Cut those out and actually blasted, repaired all the rust, as I had that big hole in the bottom front opening of the bonnet. So it's hard to access that anyway. So since I had it open, I had that all blasted. I blasted it all, epoxied, painted. So when I do get to painting, I don't have to worry about any of that. It's already done. Obviously, these cars are quite hot in the summer. I'm not sure when I determined to do the Le Mans vents in the bonnet, but it must have been one hot summer day. But and I had a couple of wrecked bonnets, so I was actually able to cut some fender sections out of the bonnet and actually test fit some of the drawings and mock up and holes in the fender. So once I determined I actually wanted and I could do it, and because I have a lot of parts cars, I'm able to actually test fit my ideas or mock up or welding or cutting. Obviously, I hate to cut something up that's perfectly in good shape and then screw it up or have to change my mind and go back. So, yeah, so I test fitted the Le Mans vents on the erected bonnet. And then instead of using the larger Vitesse or 2000 grills, I just ended up using the stock Mark 1 grills. So I've got two sets of Mark 1 grills on my Mark 1 bonnet. I think it's a little bit smaller and shorter than the drawings that you see online, but it worked out really well. I welded studs in there so they can just bolt on and off. And of course I had to modify my wiper motor bracket for it to clear. So you just saw that I did a little patch panel for the inner sill where it attaches underneath the B-post. So that was pretty easy, small. Very carefully cut out the original, marked it, drew it out, punched a hole, drilled the hole, and then welded that back. I think the angle was slightly off, and I tweaked that later on, but they ended up really well. A lot of test fitting, a lot of measuring. I've got some marks on the bracket there. So I get the tape measure and I keep measuring. And once these are in place, I ended up just tacking them in place, not fully welding, just tacking the top of the seams. So if I do need to remove it, I can just grind the top off and just remove it, relocate it, and weld it. So they're just tacked in place at the first welds. Test fit everything, and then once I'm happy and confident, then I do a full weld. And you can kind of see a bracket. It's an angle iron that's screwed to the door bracing. It's a piece of angle iron that I've placed right at the corner of the sills and rockers, right where the door seal presses on. There I am, just taking it off. So that's just there for a reference. Where the bend is in the rocker, where it meets the door sill, I put that angle iron right there, did some brackets and screwed it in. So when the new one goes in, I get it vertically and laterally in the right position within, say, a 1/16. So this inner sill new was not the greatest in the world. It actually had rust underneath the original coating. So ended up taking a lot of that coating off just because I could see it. It was flaking off. So I'll actually probably strip that down once the car is ready for paint. Alright, so here I am welding the inner sill. Alright, so I'm painting everything on the inside. So for my spot welding and plug welding, I'm taping off all the edges where everything's welded, cleaning it off, and I'll just hit everything with paint. Yeah, so you can't weld through paint. And you can't paint this once it's all together because it's all internal. So I actually use engine paint, high temperature engine paint. I've had real good luck with it. I've had my suspension painted with it. It's lasted many, many years, even on the outside with the road and gravel and weather. Plus, because it's high heat, once it cures, it actually handles the my welding pretty well. So when I'm welding on the outside, the high temperature paint will actually cope with that welding temperature pretty well. Alright, here I'm just getting about a 1/4 inch push with about a little bit more flex with that sill. Because of that door gap issue, I'm pushing it out about a 1/4 inch and it flexes back about 1/8. So I'm getting about a little bit more lee room. Gives me a little bit more wiggle room when I get the door gaps. And of course, I think the next video has the other camera. You can see a little bit more work of what I'm doing here. A couple little patches here and there. And you can see that bracket behind the handbrake. So it's not really a brace. It's just tacked in angle iron with a bolt and a nut. And the nut's welded to the end. And the nut I can actually thread in and out to get that lateral movement for the door gaps. And the fronts are usually fine. I just basically use it as a reference. So when I do cut everything out, if the car wants to flex, whatever, I can actually just push it back where it should be or where it was. Because of that door gap issue with the twist in the original doors, I was actually able to push it out a little bit more just to split the difference between the body and the doors. And again, I can always either use the black door that I'm planning that's on the car now, or if I do end up reskinning the original doors, then I can just twist it and make them fit. But with I couldn't find the Heritage door skins. I'm kind of hesitant to get the Steelcraft door skin because I'm not real. I haven't done door skins from their parts before, but I'm hoping that. Well, I'm hoping I don't need to reskin the doors, but. All right, so I guess I'm tacking the inner and outer seals together here. Right here, I'm playing with the A filler post and the rocker panel test fitting. Obviously, when I took the original rocker panel off, I tried to spot weld, drill the spot welds out as much as possible, and then pop them off. And I can see the original paint lines where the original panels came off, so it actually gives me a reference. This is one reason why I don't strip and paint the cars, strip them before I do all the welding. Nearly every project that I don't do any stripping or sandblasting until it's welded. Obviously, if you blast the body with it off the chassis or you do a rotisserie, it's going to flex and change. You don't have any reference points. And I don't throw any panels away either, especially on the TR3s. A lot of the TR3 sheet metals, they're just stamped wrong. They're just absolutely wrong. I ended up returning 90% of all the sheet metal that I bought for the TR3 project. And just making my own just because they were just wrong. Shape-wise, stamp lines, they were even like bent wrong. So I did notice later on when I put the rockers on that the 90-degree bend in the front of the rocker was shorter. So I couldn't match the paint line, which of course I kept the original pieces so I can measure it and see which was correct. So here I'm just adjusting the door and the door striker, going in and out with the A post, B post, or the rockers and the sills. Just making sure the door goes back exactly where it needed to go and goes clicky click. If you hold the door about 6-8 inches away and let go, and it should just close all the way. Double click. And of course, I'm using an angle iron reference point above the rockers for that lateral and vertical references. Alright, so I think this is end of day 3-ish. No, that's not right. I'm at 5 and 6, so this is probably 6. I guess I just took pictures. Right, so now I'm happy with the sills. I'm fully welding it. I think I'll do about 3 or 4 plug welds, and then I go back and spot weld them. Because it's not a 220 spot welder, it's not, I don't trust it 100%, depending on the thickness of the steel and how much contaminant or paint is around it. And the tips do get a little bit hot, but obviously it's not like a robot where you just see it go bang and it spot welds. You got to hold it for a few seconds. So I do plug welds just as extra measure. And then I go back and spot weld. So yeah, a combination of both. Okay, so this is the next day. Because you can actually see that filler piece underneath the A post is already finished. Alright, here I am finishing the inner sills. This should be fully welded by now. Fully welding the sills, and then I'll transition over to the rocker. Actually, I come in with a spot welding. And some of that spot welding may not be on camera, just because I have to stop and let it cool. Those tips screw onto the tongs, and you get too hot, those tongs can actually, the tips can get too hot. Alright, so here's the rocker panel painted on the inside. I'm doing all my hole punches. That hole punch is one of the greatest tools in the world. You can punch through about an 1/8 inch piece of steel with that. So these are going to be all my plug welds. I'm trying actually, in some areas, I'm actually counting the original spot welds to get the same number of, same look and number of welds. As you can see, I taped off the edges and stripped the original paint, or the new paint coating. So the inside of the rockers and most of the new pieces have the original coating plus my engine paint. So the inside of the car should be rust-free for many, many years, if not more than 50 years. So yeah, I don't ever expect to do this again. Obviously, if someone hits me, then I'll fix it. But rust issues, I do not ever expect to have a rust issues the rest of my life on this car. It's funny, because I do write inside the panels. I'm just curious to see who would actually find and see and read everything that I wrote. Alright, a lot of test fitting of the rocker and the doors. A lot of test fitting, a lot of priming, measuring. So this is why I'm working on a door gap. I keep adjusting the bolts. I'm pushing it in, pushing it out. Sometimes I'm out too much, so I'll go in and out. So I think I actually do, I need to double check the fender lower patch panel. Make sure that fits too. And I think I actually work on the A-post filler here as well. And then the front filler I think is already finished. Oh no, it looks like I'm actually welding the rocker here. Yes, so the other camera angle in the next video will actually show me doing the A filler post in the front section of the rocker. So we're coming up at the end of this video. So this rocker is being fully welded now. Double checking everything. Everything looks good. Take that bracket off, reference. And then I'm working on the filler to the body. Tacking and hammering, tacking and hammering. And again, I had the original spot welds, so I can put that filler piece exactly where it was before. So yeah, I'm finishing up the rocker. You can't see anything in this video, in this view, but the next video will show that.